Welcome to this episode of Virtual Coffee, with dialogues about the future of health, including innovation, the new era of digital first, physical next, and reflections from outside of healthcare. Brief conversations, as if it were in a barista cafe, always realistic but with a positive outlook. There are enough pessimistic channels out there already. I'm your host. My name is Lucien Engelen. 40 years of healthcare experience in ambulance services, dispatch centers, University Medical Center, and Singularity University. Both as global keynote speaker and strategic advisor. All mainly on the innovation intersection of technology and patient empowerment. Started during the COVID pandemic, checking in with friends, colleagues, and experts about topics that matter to them and to me. Distributed through LinkedIn Live, YouTube, and Facebook with video, and through Spotify, Apple Podcast, and other audio platforms, or via my website, www.transform.health. So welcome everyone to this virtual coffee on this late night Thursday, April 16th, during the COVID pandemic era, of course. And I'm very proud and also honored to introduce to you one of my big friends for tons of years already, that will join me for a big cup of coffee, which is my big and dear friend, ePatientDave, Dave deBronkart. Dave, how are you?
Well, I'm not as big as I used to be. I lost 30 pounds. I became an engaged patient. And I'm great. I'm as good as could be in this crazy era where the world is falling apart and coming back together.
Yeah, it sure is, isn't it? I remember the times back in 2011 when you were one of my first TEDx speakers at TEDx Maastricht and opened up actually literally the first conference and the first TEDx that we held, where the voice of patients needed to be not only be heard, but also be included right in the middle of it. How are your memories on that moment in time, and also you on that stage? Because I think it was the first one for, I think, such an audience, like 1,100 people or something like that, isn't it?
I remember that day very well. I mean, it was a gorgeous theater, and to step out on that stage onto that giant big red dot, which I had never done before, and see the people in two balconies and everything. I also remember, you and I had chatted a lot online, and we had met that week. What I remember is that you are a kind of crazy that whenever you suggest something to me, I've learned I must do it, because although I can't see why, the world's about to tip and tumble in a new way. I remember very well, I was backstage waiting to go on when you told me that I had to do this crazy e-patient rap that I had never spoken out loud before.
You were always humming that rap, and indeed, I think I tricked you in the backstage indeed, and you pulled up your shades, jumped on stage, and started that big rap, and it totally upset the whole audience, of course.
And the thing that's really important, you talk about the intersection of technology and patient empowerment. A lot of people talk about those pieces, but you have a kind of insight to the social leverage. All right, how do we convey these points in a way that gets into people's mind and starts moving things? And for anybody who doesn't know, Lucien and I are good friends, but although I'm a professional speaker, he has never given me a penny for anything in terms of any work we do
well,
together.
I think the rewards also is the one that I'm showing on this picture right now, where 1,100 people got on their feet and giving you a minute-long standing ovation, which is not to say in terms of the payment of it, of course. I think you're just joking a bit about that, but it's more like that's the thing that we try to get up and running. And one of the reasons I asked you back in the days, mainly also, was your strive, and it shows on your coffee mug indeed, your strive for the data to bring that in the hands of patients and citizens themselves. So this is almost 10 years ago. Well, actually, almost.
9. Yeah.
Yeah. Where do we stand right now, if you would reflect on that?
It's amazing. You know, ever since I was a college student in Boston in the hippie years, I've wanted social change. You know, I went through several decades of being a businessman in between, and here we are, we're accomplishing social change. On March 9th, the US government announced new regulations that say that all my data in the medical record systems must be made available through an open source standard software interface, so that there's no more toll booths where money is. We're winning. We have legally the right now to get all our data. Of course, it will take years for that to be fully implemented.
Sure.
But we have essentially won. And now we can start to build the future that we have visualized for so long.
And in that perspective, what are the challenges that we face still? I think one of the things that I see now during this COVID pandemic, it looks like all of a sudden everything in terms of digital kicks in. Video conferencing by the day, multiple times, remote monitoring of it. And I written a blog where I said, I think we were pregnant from digital health for years. And now all of a sudden through a C-section that's called COVID, everything explodes. What are your worries or think about the speed of this? Is that going good enough? Is it like, are we taking patients' voices into account enough?
So some people certainly are. All right. The big problem here is that there is an encrusted paradigm, a mental model in the medical profession, especially the older half of the medical profession, that says, look, it's hard to become a doctor. You have to study a lot of science. You have to know a lot of things, pass some really difficult tests. What could patients have to offer? And after 10 years of studying this, I've come to a realization that this is rooted in the reality of 100 years ago, when nobody like me or you and me could possibly have access to information that would let us put data in its context. That world has changed. And so, so we were joking, you and I have been doing digital things for ages, right? Like, here is a 3D printed mini me.
The mini me Dave.
When I started showing this, all right, sensible people said, well, but what are you going to do with that? So what? You've got data. You're not a doctor, right? And then on another visit, I've had for years in my speeches, I showed that I have the radiology from when I had cancer, the lung images reconstructed into 3D structures, and you 3D printed it for me on a visit. So these lumps here are my tumors, right? And people say, what are you going to do with that? Well, here's the thing. I'll be the judge of that. It's my data. And what we're starting to see now, the health system is overloaded with this virus. We have a need for more hospital beds in New York than there are hospital beds. Same thing happened in Lombardy, in Italy. And so now when we get to the point where the system is in the process of collapsing or is in danger of collapsing, the medical professionals have no choice anymore but to take into account, well, what's most important to the person who has the problem? And this is transformative. And my final point on this is people will often say, well, patients don't understand all of this. They don't understand what's in the medical record. Well, as long as you keep us away from it, that will
Yeah, you'll
continue
never
to be
learn.
true.
You indeed also never learn about that. So
Yes, exactly.
I'm also watching some of the comments and the questions. By the way, I also just saw that our mutual big friend Lauren Sherman, who also was one of our speakers at our TEDx conference, also is online. So big shout out to Lawrence, my friend. Good to see you virtually. One of the questions that has been asked about also sharing the medical records is, what about privacy? Obviously, there's also always the question about privacy that we need to ask for that. Are these concerns regarding the health records sincere? Should we put them away? Should we neglect it? Or should we emphasize on it? Or what I like to think often, it's a trade-off. Like in the current era that we're in right now with this COVID pandemic, there is a trade-off about the information that you can see and need because we're in an acute situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are your thoughts about that?
Well, my observation is that this is not a yes or no decision. This is just the latest version of what happens when a new asset becomes digital. There was a time when credit cards only existed and credit card numbers only existed in physical reality. For somebody to steal it, they had to steal your card or perhaps steal the carbon paper that had a credit card imprint. When that became digital, it became vulnerable to hackers. So my personal view is that the last thing anybody today would really want to do is go back to where credit cards were only physical objects. I mean, there's no Amazon in that era, right? You can't pay for anything online. What we need to do is think together as a society. What are the benefits? What are the risks? And how do we move forward? And as it turns out, that is just one more expression of what happens when little kids grow up and start to become tweens and then adolescents and young adults. They make mistakes. Some of them get killed in car crashes. Some of them do dumb things. But what we're learning, without a doubt, especially those of us who have grandchildren, the next generation is coming along and they're growing up into a world that we didn't know. The remedy is to teach them to think for themselves and be careful and responsible.
Yeah, well, I think that's also one of the interesting things that also Simon Sinek, who was also one of the speakers at the same conference, also shared with us back in the days, where he said the millennials that are growing up are used to what he likes to call this instant economy. Everything should be available right now on an instant, this Instagram generation, so to speak. Is your opinion and viewpoint about, for instance, the use of medical records for what you know for these youngsters, so to speak, the same as for people who have grown up?
Well, see, not all youngsters are identical and not all old people are identical.
Sure
right?
enough.
The real juice here is to look for what is the opportunity. What are we going to be able to do? At the same time that you think about what bad might happen, you need to be thinking about what bad is already happening. Leading up to the big HIMSS Global Health IT conference that eventually got canceled.
Well, that got canceled physically. It did run digitally.
Yes. Thank you very much. And but leading up to that, that was also the week that the new federal rules were announced, stipulating that our records have to be released and so on. Well, because we knew that there was, in the patient activist world, we knew there was going to be pressure and resistance. A number of us, including the great activist and advocate Grace Cordovano, started doing a patient story collection. of bad things that had happened because the family didn't have the health data from the medical record, mistakes, missing information, harm that happened, and good things that happened when people did have the information. And that story collection now lives on Grace's website, Unblock Health, and I haven't seen a single person who has paged through those stories and hasn't come away saying, yeah, there's no question. You can't consider the bad that might happen without considering the bad that already is happening.
Yeah, well, can imagine that one indeed. So wrapping up a bit, Dave, from everything that is going to happen during this COVID pandemic, one of the things that anyhow is going to happen is that we will restart and reignite healthcare with all the postponed operative procedures and all the other things into it. Given your patient advocacy for the past decades, what would your advice be, not only to administrators in healthcare, but also to governments, in how to incorporate patients' view and patients' voice in that? Could you share your thoughts about that with us?
It's a wonderful question. The reality is there are parts of our health system that are already being blown apart. We all know that telemedicine is being done a lot more than it was, and the huge, just transformational change, real game changer in the United States has been that for the first time, our government health department, CMS, is paying for telemedicine visits. And I don't know anybody who's been doing that who wants to go back. I think that's going to persist. And in similar, you and I could talk for hours on this, in similar ways, the system that has to some extent either fallen apart or has been blown to pieces will start coming back together, like after some sort of a big bang. And it's a tremendous opportunity to involve the stakeholders, not just the people who work in the system, like the money people and academics, but the frontline doctors and nurses and the frontline patients. And you know who they are? They are the people who are at the point of care. If we can optimize new workflows around what's important to them so they can accomplish the job of care more effectively with less effort. I'll tell you one other way that's really personal for me. I'm not young anymore, and I'm in the boomer generation that, if COVID hadn't come along, we are about to crush the system too. And it's a wonderful thing. I'll tell you what, you know what I want? I want stuff that the health system can do for me while I'm at home. Guess what? That's what we have with COVID. I am not eager to go into the hospital or the doctor's office that much. We can't optimize for consumer value unless we engage the consumer.
That's a great thought, and that's a great advice to wrap this virtual coffee up for now. Dave, again, thank you very much, not only for your company during this virtual coffee, but also for your leadership and your provoking thought leadership over the course of the past years. And I hope that we can enjoy that for many, many years after this one. Thank you very much again, and hope to see you soon, of course, in real life. Thank you very much.
I'll end with the last words of my TED Talk at your place.
We should. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Again, thank you very much, people out there already, also for your questions and your praises. People are chiming in through WhatsApp, through LinkedIn, and to Twitter. This was today's session of Virtual Coffee with Lucian Engelen. They will be online on YouTube, but also the audio version on the separate channels like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, of course. Looking forward to seeing and hearing more of you over the course of the next days. Stay safe, stay home, and wash your hands.